Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you're passionate about war history, untold battles, and the real stories behind machines, soldiers, and strategies, you're in the right place. In today's video, we're diving deep into why Germans surrendered in droves rather than fight the advancing Americans. A story that many people talk about, but very few truly understand. After our last video, I went through hundreds of your comments, and 4 questions kept appearing again and again. And finally, today, we're going to answer all of these questions, not with myths, not with exaggeration, but with real history. So grab your headphones, sit back, and let's move straight into the battlefield. Let's begin. The question: why did German soldiers throw down their weapons in the West while fighting desperately in the East? March 1945, the Rhine River, once a German defensive dream, now lies behind the Americans. U.S. troops of the Ninth Army splash across in assault boats under a gray spring sky, the water churning brown from artillery fire. On the far bank, Wehrmacht soldiers peer from trenches, young boys in oversized helmets, weary veterans with hollow eyes. They see the olive-drab tide coming, Shermans rumbling, infantry advancing in loose lines, no screaming charges like the Soviets, just relentless, well-fed GIs with endless supplies. You can almost feel the cold mud sucking at boots, the rumble of engines vibrating through the ground. The Germans know the end is near. But in the West, something changes. Rifles clatter to the ground, hands rise, white flags appear, sheets, handkerchiefs, even underwear tied to bayonets. Thousands surrender without a fight. In the Ruhr Pocket alone, over 300,000 will lay down arms in days. Why? Why not die for the fatherland here as they do against the Red Army? The answer begins with a brutal truth. Germans knew the difference between captors. On the Eastern Front, the war was racial annihilation, millions dead, atrocities on both sides, no mercy expected. Soviet captivity meant gulags, starvation, revenge. But the Americans? They offered food, cigarettes, a chance to live. Propaganda had painted the West as decadent, but reality showed humane treatment. GIs shared rations, medics treated wounded, no mass executions. A young Fallschirmjäger in the Ruhr whispers to his comrade, "Better Army-Gefangenschaft than Russian hell." The floodgates open. Mass surrenders accelerate the collapse. The West advances faster, unopposed. The Reich crumbles from within. Yet this isn't just fear, it's calculation, and the Ruhr Pocket will become the largest single surrender in Western Europe. The question: why did so many Germans choose quick surrender over prolonged resistance in the West? April 1945. The Ruhr Pocket closes like a noose. Over 300,000 Wehrmacht troops, remnants of Army Group B, are trapped in the industrial heart of Germany. Factories burn, skies black with Allied bombers, roads clogged with refugees and wrecked vehicles. American infantry advances methodically, house to house, supported by Shermans and Thunderbolts strafing anything that moves. No suicidal Banzai-style charges, no human wave attacks, just overwhelming firepower and the promise of life. You can almost smell the acrid smoke of burning oil, hear the distant crump of artillery, feel the exhaustion in every German soldier's bones. Many are Volkssturm, old men and boys pressed into service with rifles older than they are. Others are veterans of the Eastern Front, haunted by what they saw there: frozen corpses, mass graves, comrades shot for retreating. They know the difference between fronts. In the East, surrender meant torture, starvation, or execution, Soviet revenge for years of barbarity. In the West, the Americans were different. GIs often treated prisoners with surprising decency. Rations shared, wounded evacuated. No systematic beatings or summary executions. Captured Germans were fed hot meals, spam, cigarettes, coffee, things their own supply lines hadn't delivered in months. Propaganda had lied. The armies were not Jewish Bolshevik monsters. They were pragmatic soldiers who wanted the war over. Many Germans had family in the West or had heard rumors from POWs released on parole. The Americans are fair. They don't kill you for nothing. A Feldwebel in a ruined factory whispers to his men, "Better 3 years in an American camp than 1 winter in Siberia." White flags appear, tied to sticks, waved from windows, even from tank turrets. Entire battalions stack arms without firing a shot. In the Ruhr, surrenders happen in waves, 50,000 one day, 100,000 the next. Model's Army Group B disintegrates not from combat, but from mass defection. This isn't cowardice, it's survival math. The Reich is finished. Hitler rants from his bunker, but his orders no longer reach the front. Discipline collapses. Officers look the other way when men slip away. Some even encourage surrender to save lives. Yet the contrast with the East remains stark. In Berlin, the same men would fight house to house against the Red Army. In the West, they drop rifles and raise hands. The Americans advance at walking pace, almost unopposed, because the Germans had already decided the war in the West is over. But one final question looms. What broke the will so completely that entire armies chose captivity over death? The question. What finally shattered German morale so completely in the West? April 18, 1945. The Ruhr Pocket is no more. Field Marshal Walther Model, once one of Hitler's most trusted commanders, stands in a ruined forest near Wuppertal. His Army Group B has ceased to exist. Over 317,000 men, 29 divisions, the industrial core of the Reich, surrendered. The largest capitulation of German forces in the Western theater. Model, refusing Soviet-style captivity, shoots himself. His staff buries him quietly under an oak tree. You can almost hear the silence after the guns stop, the eerie quiet of a battlefield where no one fights anymore. Panzers sit abandoned, barrels lowered, engines cold. Infantry columns march into American lines in orderly ranks, rifles slung, hands empty. Some smile at the GIs offering cigarettes, others stare blankly, hollowed by months of defeat. What broke them? First, overwhelming material superiority. The Americans arrive with fresh divisions, endless fuel, food, ammunition. German units scavenge for bullets, eat turnips and horse meat, ride bicycles because horses are dead. The contrast is demoralizing. A captured lieutenant later tells interrogators, "We saw their trucks, new, full, endless. Ours were wrecks from 1941. Second, the air. P-47 Thunderbolts and Typhoons own the sky. Any movement by day invites rockets and bombs. German soldiers learn, stay hidden or die. Morale collapses when men realize they cannot even move without becoming targets. Third, the leadership vacuum. Hitler's orders grow insane, hold every village, no retreat, fight to the last man. But frontline commanders quietly ignore them. Many encourage surrender to save lives. Discipline erodes, desertions become mass movements. Volkssturm boys, once fanatical, see veterans giving up and follow suit. Fourth, the knowledge of what awaits in the East. Rumors from returning wounded, Red Army atrocities, mass rapes, executions. In the West, Americans are seen as fair-weather enemies. They want the war over, not revenge. POW camps in France and the US promise food and relative safety. Thousands of Germans calculate 3 years behind wire beats death or Siberia. Finally, the psychological tipping point.
the realization that the war is lost. Berlin is encircled. The Führer is a ghost in a bunker. No miracle weapons, no relief. When hope dies, resistance dies with it. In the West, surrender becomes rational. In the East, it remains suicidal. That single difference explains the droves laying down arms before the Americans, while their comrades in Berlin fight street by street against the Soviets. The Ruhr surrender accelerates the end. The Rhine is crossed. The heart of Germany opens. The war in the West ends not with a bang, but with thousands of raised hands. But one last question remains. How did this mass capitulation change the final weeks of the war?
Section 4. The question: how did mass surrenders in the West reshape the final weeks of the European war? Late April 1945. The Ruhr Pocket is history. What remains of Army Group B, once 500,000 strong, has vanished into American POW cages. Modal suicide marks the symbolic end. The industrial heart of Germany, the factories that once fed the Wehrmacht's war machine, falls without a final stand. The Rhine is wide open. American armies pour across in multiple places: Remagen Bridge, Oppenheim, Mainz. Patton races east, Hodges north, Bradley's center collapses the pocket. You can almost taste the dust kicked up by endless columns of olive-drab trucks, hear the low growl of Shermans rolling unopposed through German villages. White flags flutter from every window. Civilians wave cautiously. Children run out with hands raised in mock surrender. Resistance is sporadic. Die-hard SS units, fanatical Hitler Youth pockets, but the bulk of the Wehrmacht has already quit. Entire divisions dissolve overnight. Roads are clogged not with fighting, but with Germans marching west to give themselves up. The speed is breathtaking. In the east, the Red Army fights for every street in Berlin, losing tens of thousands. In the west, Eisenhower's forces advance 20-30 miles a day with minimal casualties. By early May, the Americans reach the Elbe River, meeting the Soviets there in a symbolic handshake at Torgau. The link-up happens almost without resistance. Germans prefer American captivity to Soviet occupation. Entire units cross lines deliberately to surrender to the armies rather than the Iwans. This mass capitulation shortens the war dramatically. Without prolonged fighting in the West, Allied resources, aircraft, fuel, men are freed to press harder elsewhere. Bombing continues unabated. Supplies flow to the front lines instead of being consumed in attrition battles. The Western Allies occupy far more territory than they might have if the Germans had fought to the last cartridge. Berlin falls to the Soviets, but the Western zones are secured earlier, larger, with less destruction. The psychological effect is profound. German civilians see the contrast: American troops distributing food, setting up civil administration, treating prisoners humanely. Rumors spread: the Amis are not monsters. This softens the occupation, reduces partisan activity, and eases the transition to peace. In the East, the Red Army's advance brings terror, revenge, and mass rapes, fueling decades of bitterness. In the end, the droves of Germans surrendering to the Americans did more than end the fighting in the West. They redrew the map of post-war Europe, they saved countless lives on both sides, and they proved a harsh lesson. When hope dies and mercy appears on one front, even the most disciplined army can choose life over death. The Reich did not fall with a thunderous last battle in the West. It collapsed quietly, rifle by rifle, hand by raised hand, because the men who once marched for Hitler finally decided the war was no longer worth dying for.